So I recently went through something I wouldn't wish on anybody. You ever stand there, frozen, watching someone shove a key into the lock of something that means more to you than most people will ever understand? That was me, staring at the cheap metal teeth of a so-called master key, grinding against the paint of my pride and joy. My heart flatlined first, then it exploded. It wasn't just any truck. It was a 1972 Ford F-100 cherry red, rebuilt with a 390 V8 that could roar like a thunderstorm rolling through the valley. I didn't buy it. I bled for it. 3 years of busted knuckles, long nights and Saturdays that stretched into Sundays. Every bolt, every panel, every piece of that engine carried a fingerprint of my best friend, Jake. He and I pulled that forgotten skeleton out of a farmer's field and brought it back to life one slow, sacred step at a time. And now, on my own damn property, some entitled hand was trying to claim it. When the screen door slammed behind me, I already knew who it was. The sharp bob haircut, the HOA polo stretched like a badge of authority, clipboard ready like a weapon. Karen, president of the HOA, queen of beige houses and clipped hedges. She didn't flinch when she saw me, didn't even blink, just smiled like she'd found a loophole in reality itself. And standing beside her, arms crossed and chin weak, was Richard, her husband. His eyes weren't on me. They were locked on my truck, drinking it in like he already owned it. "Can I help you?" My voice came out quiet, tight. In the service, I learned a long time ago, when you're furious, don't shout. People lean in closer to whispers. And right before the hammer drops, that silence is the most dangerous thing in the world. Karen held up the key, dangling it like some trophy. A ring with dozens of other keys clinking together like she was the warden of a prison. "This vehicle," she said, chin pointing at my truck, "is in violation of Article 7, Section C of the Community Bylaws. It's improperly parked." I blinked, then looked at the truck, parked in my driveway, on my property. Same spot it had been every day since I moved in. "It's in my driveway," I said flatly. "Your driveway," she snapped like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror, "is considered common property frontage for aesthetic review. This vehicle is classified as a work truck. Oversized tires, not a permitted family vehicle. We've issued multiple warnings." Oh, I'd seen their notices. I'd tossed them into the barbecue pit and used them for kindling. That paper was the only thing they were ever good for. Richard smirked, his voice oily. "The bylaws are clear. Unapproved vehicles can be towed and impounded. Karen's just trying to save you the fee by moving it herself." Impound lot. He made it sound official, but I knew the truth. They were talking about the dusty gravel patch behind the community pool where picnic tables went to die. Karen smiled again, that tight, smug smile. "I have a master key for all community-facing property. It's for emergencies." I clenched my fists so tight my knuckles ached. Trying to steal my truck isn't an emergency. She tilted her head, her voice dripping like poison honey. "It's not theft when it's enforcing the rules you agreed to." And then she turned back to the lock, gave the key another hard shove. Metal groaned against paint. That was my truck she was scratching. That was Jake's memory she was gouging. My teeth ground harder than the key. "Get away from my truck, Karen, right now." She didn't move, just glanced over her shoulder with a challenge in her eyes. "Or what? You'll threaten me, a defenseless woman just doing her job." She wanted me to blow up. She wanted the big guy to lose his temper so she could play victim. My blood boiled, but 10 years as a military cop taught me better. Rage is a weapon, but only if you aim it. I forced my hands open. Then it happened. The cheap key bent with a dull snap. Karen stared at it, her face flipping from smug to furious in an instant. She yanked it out, threw the whole ring on the ground, and slammed her clipboard against the fender of my truck. The bang echoed down the street. A long white scratch sliced across the red paint. My truck, my best friend's legacy. That was it. The surge of heat in my chest could have burned the whole block, but I stayed put, calm, silent, watching. Karen, though, wasn't done. She whipped out her phone, her fingers flying like she'd rehearsed this too. "You see this, Richard? He's being aggressive. He's cornering me. He's dangerous." Then to 911, her voice turned into a shaky, breathless act. "Yes, I need help. A very large man has threatened me on his property. I'm the HOA president. I was just enforcing a bylaw. Please hurry. I'm scared of what he'll do." She hung up, her eyes glittering with victory. She thought she had me. Big guy, little woman sob story. The cops would roll in, see her tears, and haul me away. But what Karen didn't know was that 2 weeks earlier, after someone let the air out of my tires, I'd installed cameras. Crystal clear video. Audio too. And one of them was aimed right at my driveway. That day, the only thing Karen really unlocked was the first chain in a trap of her own making. Everyone heard the sirens before they saw the lights. A faint wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. And Karen, oh, she was glowing, standing there with Richard at her side, whispering like they were about to watch my life unravel. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd written the final chapter of my story. I didn't move. I stayed on my porch, arms crossed, watching, silent, calm. The calm was killing her more than any outburst could have. Across the street, blinds shifted. My neighbor Louis was peeking through, his old eyes wide. I knew he'd been watching from the moment the key bent. People always watched when Karen was involved. The first cruiser pulled up, then a second. Doors opened. 2 officers stepped out. One was young, crisp uniform, face hard and unreadable. The other was older, thick mustache, the kind of man whose eyes had seen enough lies to spot one before the first word left a mouth. Karen rushed forward like she'd been waiting for her stage cue. Her voice cracked, hands trembling like a Broadway performance. "Oh, thank God you're here, officers. He threatened me. I feared for my life." She jabbed a finger toward me, her whole body shaking as if I'd already raised a hand. Richard joined in, adding details with the smoothness of someone who thought he'd rehearsed the perfect lie. "He charged at us, aggressive, cornered Karen. We barely escaped." His voice almost shook with fake fear, but underneath it I could hear something else. Triumph. The young cop scribbled notes fast. The older one glanced at me, then at the truck, then back at Karen. His brow furrowed just slightly. I walked down the steps slowly, hands open, palms forward. Calm. "Officers," I said evenly. "That's not what happened. She attempted to break into my vehicle and damaged it. I have it all on video." The second I said the word video, Karen froze, just for a blink, but it was enough. Her face dropped the act before she scrambled back into it, voice sharp. "That's illegal. You can't record me without permission." The older cop's sigh was deep, heavy. "Ma'am, this is a public-facing area. If he has cameras on his house, that's perfectly legal." He looked at me again. "You said you have footage." "Yes, sir," I said, pulling out my phone. From the second she walked up to my truck until the moment she called 911. I handed him the screen. He pressed play. The audio was clear, the video sharper than I could have hoped. Karen jamming the key, me telling her to stop. Her hitting the fender, the scratch appearing. Her fake phone call, trembling voice, claiming I'd cornered her when I was 30 feet away. The younger cop slowed his pen. The older one watched it twice. Then he handed me my phone back, his patience gone. He turned to Karen, his voice hard now. "Ma'am, your statement doesn't match the evidence. Filing a false police report is a serious offense. On top of that, you attempted unlawful entry of a vehicle and caused visible damage." Karen's jaw dropped. "What? No, I am the president of this association. I am empowered to." "You are not empowered to break the law," he cut in, pointing to the ring of keys still lying in the dirt. "That's your key." Her silence was the loudest answer of all. "Bag it," the older cop said to his partner. Then to Karen, "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back." The color drained from her face. Richard sputtered, stepping forward. "You can't do this. We know people, city council." The officer ignored him, cuffing Karen with calm efficiency, reading her rights as neighbors peeked out from blinds and cracked doors. The self-proclaimed queen was marched to the back of a squad car like any other criminal. She looked at me then, and if looks could burn flesh, I'd have been ash on the pavement. Richard stood frozen, his face pale, his fists trembling. He wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but without Karen, he was just a shadow. He slunk back toward their beige palace, eyes shooting me one last hateful glare. The cops took my statement, gave me a case number. Promised detectives would be in touch. Then they drove off, Karen's face pressed to the glass, rage boiling behind the bars of that patrol car window. The street grew quiet. Louis peeked out again, this time giving me a shaky thumbs up before disappearing back behind the blinds. For the first time that day, I exhaled. I should have felt victory, relief, satisfaction. Instead, I felt the rough scar of fresh paint beneath my fingertips as I ran my hand over the fender. A long white scratch carved into the cherry red. A scar across 3 years of memory, sweat, and friendship. And then I saw it. A slip of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Not from the police, from the HOA. A violation notice. I stared at it for a long moment, my pulse steadying into something darker than anger. Because I knew right then this wasn't over, not even close. Karen's cuffs weren't the end, they were only the beginning. Everyone thought it ended the night Karen left in cuffs. A few neighbors even smiled the next morning like balance had been restored, like the tyrant had finally been dethroned. But I knew better. Because when you've seen people like her, people who thrive on control, you learn something. Taking their power for a moment doesn't break them. It only makes them dig deeper, sharper, meaner. That notice under my windshield wasn't just paper. It was a declaration of war. And the war hadn't started that night with flashing sirens. It had started months earlier, quietly, like a leak in the ceiling you tell yourself isn't serious. Until one day the floor caves in. I moved into Chestnut Drive 2 years earlier. After 10 years as a military cop, I thought I'd finally earned peace. I wanted a quiet street, a place with enough garage space to get lost in the sound of an engine turning over. A modest house, a little yard, nothing flashy. The garage sold me instantly. I could see it in my head, the walls lined with tools, the floor covered in projects, the F-100 shining like the crown jewel. And for 6 months, that's exactly what it was. Quiet, peaceful, almost perfect. The truck was the first thing I moved in. Cherry red against the beige monotony of the neighborhood. It wasn't just a truck, it was Jake. Jake was my best friend, my brother in every way except blood. He was the engine guy, faster, bolder, always laughing through grease-stained hands. I was the body guy, patient, meticulous, smoothing panels until they gleamed. Together we pulled that truck out of a farmer's field when most people would have left it to rust into the earth. We poured hours into it, side by side. Weekends bled into months, months into years. We were nearly finished when he got deployed. A tour I couldn't take with him. He left me with a smile, with promises of beers when he got back, with the last joke he ever cracked about me polishing that truck more than I'd ever polish my boots. He didn't come home. Every time I touch the hood, I hear him laughing again. Every time the V8 rumbles, it feels like he's right there beside me. That truck is my tether to him. And nothing, not time, not grief, not some petty HOA, was ever going to take it away. The first notice came small. My grass was too high. I measured it myself. It was. I cut it anyway, hoping it would keep the peace. The second was about trash cans being visible for 2 hours too long. $50 fine. I paid it just to avoid the headache. Then the neighborhood started to show its true face. Perfect lawns, identical paint colors, silence. Like living in a set where every house was a prop, every family an actor. Too clean, too staged. That's when I heard the whispers. Louis, my next-door neighbor, leaned over the fence one day, his hands stained from gardening, his voice low. She runs it all, you know. Karen, 5 years president, promised to keep property values high. Translation, make everyone miserable. I thought he was exaggerating until the stories piled up. A family forced to repaint their front door because the shade of blue was too cheerful. A swing set torn down because it wasn't pre-approved. Fines for things as absurd as leaving a basketball hoop in a driveway, and always the same 2 signatures, Karen, president, Richard, treasurer. The first time she came to me, it was about the truck. Knocked on my door without so much as a greeting, pointed like she was ordering me to take out the trash. That vehicle, she said, her nose wrinkled, is an eyesore. It lowers the tone of the neighborhood. It's a classic restoration, I told her, forcing patience. It's my hobby. This isn't a place for hobbies that involve grease and noise, she sniffed, as though motor oil fumes were clinging to the air. This is a respectable community. You need to keep it in the garage. I do keep it in the garage, I answered, jaw tight. I was waxing it. Am I allowed to wax my own vehicle on my own property? Her eyes narrowed. "Don't get smart with me, I'm giving you a warning. Keep that thing out of sight." And then she turned and left. No discussion, no compromise, just a decree. The notices grew after that. A hose coiled improperly. A welcome mat that was approved. A noise violation for listening to the radio while polishing chrome. Each fine was small. 50, 100, death by paper cuts. It wasn't about money. It was about control, about pushing me, waiting for me to snap. Richard was worse in his own way. He never said much. But I'd catch him watching the truck from his window, his bland silver sedan parked beside him like a monument to mediocrity. The way he looked at my truck wasn't just hate. It was envy. He didn't just despise it because it stood out. He wanted it. And that's when I understood. My truck wasn't just a violation in their eyes. It was defiance. It was freedom. It was something in this beige empire they couldn't regulate, repaint, or fine into submission, and that made it dangerous. So when I caught Karen shoving her so-called master key into its lock, it all clicked. The months of harassment, the staged violations, the threats, they were never going to stop. Not until the truck was gone. Not until I was broken. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. And as I stared at that scratch in the paint, at that notice tucked under my wiper, I realized something. They crossed the line, not just into my property, into my soul. They thought they'd scared me, thought I'd pay the fine, hide the truck, stay quiet. But what they'd really done was wake something I'd kept buried since I hung up my uniform. They'd woken the soldier. And soldiers do fold. The morning after Karen's ride in the back of a squad car was quiet. Too quiet. I half expected an army of tow trucks to come rumbling up the street, chains ready to drag the F-100 away. But when I opened my blinds, the truck was still there, gleaming in the sun, scratch and all. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the way a soldier feels when the battlefield goes silent. The enemy isn't gone. They're regrouping. Louis shuffled over that afternoon, hands full of weeds he pretended to be pulling. His voice dropped to a whisper. "She's back. Richard bilayed her out within hours. She's been packing the house since dawn. Mark, this ain't over." I didn't need him to tell me. The $1,000 violation notice Karen had slipped under my wiper before she got cuffed was still sitting on my kitchen counter. A fine for failure to comply and creating a hostile community environment. Post dated for the next day. She planned it before she even touched the truck. It was premeditated. And that made it war. The counterattack came fast. Not tow trucks, but envelopes. Dozens of them, crammed into my mailbox like some cruel joke. Everyone stamped with the HOA's seal. Everyone another violation. My hedges, unruly, $75. A crack in the driveway that had been there since I bought the place. Structural hazard, $200. An oil stain in the concrete where the F-100 usually sat. Environmental hazard, $150. It didn't matter if the fines made sense. That wasn't the point. Richard was bleeding me dry, one official-looking letter at a time, and he was meticulous. The treasurer, the spider in the web. Karen played the queen, loud and dramatic. Richard played the accountant of misery. Together, they made a perfect trap. I wasn't the only one caught in it. Louis came knocking one evening, a folded slip of paper shaking in his hand. His face looked pale, almost sick. "They fined me, Mark. $20 a gnome." I blinked. "What?" He swallowed hard. "They counted them, all 53, said it's excessive ornamentation. That's $1,000, $1,000 for gnomes." His voice cracked, and for the first time since I'd met him, Louis looked small. Broken. Those gnomes weren't just decorations. They were his joy, his little rebellion against the beige, and Karen knew it. She'd gone for his heart the same way she went for mine. I gritted my teeth. "You're not paying it." "I don't know if I have a choice," he muttered. Richard looks at me like I'm next on the chopping block, like he's already counting how much he'll get when I sell. I put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Louis, you're not paying, we fight." His watery eyes lifted to mine. For the first time, I saw hope flicker there. But I also saw fear, because he knew what I knew. People like Karen and Richard didn't stop when you pushed back. They escalated. And escalate they did. A week later, a certified letter arrived. Heavy paper, lawyer's letterhead, the kind of envelope that makes your stomach twist before you even tear it open. It was from the HOA's attorney. The words were sharp and cold. Outstanding balance, $1,925. Failure to pay within 30 days will result in a lien placed on your property. A lien? That wasn't just a fine, that was the kill shot. With a lien, my credit would tank, my house would be trapped. I couldn't sell, couldn't refinance, they'd own a piece of me. They were tightening the noose, one fee at a time, until they strangled me off my own land. I called the only person I could trust with something this big, Ben, Jake's older brother. A lawyer with a mind like a scalpel. I laid it all out. The harassment, the false fines, Karen's arrest, the video evidence, and now the lien threat. Ben was silent on the other end, too long. Finally, his voice came low and heavy. Mark, this isn't just a cranky HOA, a lien over something this petty, that's aggressive. They're not just enforcing rules, they're trying to force you out. I rubbed my temples, staring at the scratch in my truck's fender. I know, question is, what do I do? Sue them. You could, Ben said slowly. But it's expensive, takes time. And most HOA bylaws are written so if the homeowner loses, you pay their legal fees too. That's a big gamble. I hung up with a knot of dread in my gut. One man. Up against an HOA, a treasurer with venom in his veins, and now lawyers on their payroll. They had the bylaws, the system, the money. And all I had was one scratched truck, and a handful of neighbors too scared to stand up. But as I stood in that garage, the air thick with motor oil and memory, I didn't feel hopeless. I felt fire. That truck wasn't just metal, it was Jake, it was legacy. It was the line they had no right to cross. And I remembered something from my years as an MP. You don't beat people like Karen and Richard by yelling louder. You beat them with patience, with intelligence, with their own arrogance turned back on them. They'd drawn their line, now it was my turn. The bear they'd been poking was wide awake, and this bear knew how to build traps. The lien notice sat on my counter like a live grenade. Every time I walked past it, I felt the pin rattling loose. They thought they had me cornered. One man, no allies, no way out. But they underestimated something. 10 years as a military cop had taught me one thing above all: no enemy is untouchable. Everyone makes mistakes, and arrogance makes the biggest ones. So I turned my house into a war room. The dining table disappeared under stacks of paper. Property records, HOA filings, past lawsuits. I dug through everything I could find, highlighter in one hand, black coffee in the other. It was tedious, boring, exactly the kind of ground where tyrants get sloppy. And then I saw it. A pattern families find into foreclosure. Houses suddenly sold cheap. Always to the same buyer, Chestnut Holdings, LLC. The name stank. A faceless company scooping up property like vultures circling roadkill. On paper, it looked clean, local enough to blend in, but something about it felt rotten. I dug deeper. The LLC was registered out of state, shielded behind layers of legal camouflage. Owners hidden, trails covered, but walls like that, I knew how to climb. Night after night, I combed through filings, tracing every line, every address, every number. And then it happened. Buried in a document was a tiny detail. A mailing address for official correspondence. Not a corporate office, not a law firm. A P.O. box in the next town over. My gut tightened. That was the weak spot. So Saturday morning, I parked my beat-up sedan outside that post office. Not the F-100. Couldn't risk being recognized. 4 hours of watching people come and go, wondering if I'd made a fool of myself. Then I saw him. Richard. He shuffled in like a man running an errand. Gold watch flashing. Clipboard tucked under his arm. He slid a key into the box, pulled out a fat stack of envelopes, stuffed them into his briefcase, and scurried out without ever looking around. He never saw me. My pulse hammered. That was it. Richard wasn't just signing fines. He was collecting the mail for the very company that was buying up the houses his wife was driving people out of. This wasn't just harassment. It was organized, it was calculated, it was theft. But it was still just my word. My eyes, I needed proof. The universe delivered it 2 nights later. I came home late, headlights sweeping over the driveway. My stomach dropped. The F-100 sagged on one side. One tire slashed, the rubber carved open with a blade. Not a leak, a message. They didn't leave a note. They didn't need to. I ran to the cameras. Grainy footage of a hooded figure moving quick, head down, careful, almost careful enough, but not quite. For one split second, under the streetlight, the sleeve lifted. A flash of gold. A clunky, oversized watch. Richard's watch. That was all I needed. They'd gone from paper cuts to knives, from harassment to sabotage. My blood boiled. I wanted to storm across the street, kick their door down, and drag Richard out by his collar. But training screamed at me. Rage without aim is suicide. No, this had to be precise. So I went out to the garage, laid my hand on the cool red fender of the truck, and asked Jake the question I'd been asking since the day he didn't come home. "What would you do, brother?" And in my head I heard his laugh. I saw that fire in his eyes. He wouldn't just get mad, he'd get even, but he'd do it with a grin. That's when the plan started forming. I needed inside their house, their computer, their files. Somewhere in there was the smoking gun, bank records showing the HOA fines flowing in, the property purchases flowing out. But how do you walk into the fortress of your enemy? You don't break in, you make them invite you. And what was their weakness? Their obsession with rules. So I built my Trojan horse. I combed through the HOA bylaws until my eyes blurred. Article 12, Section F, exterior modifications require in-person consultation and approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The committee, of course, was just Karen and Richard. Perfect. I wrote up a renovation proposal so outrageous, so offensive to their beige sensibilities, that they couldn't resist demanding a face-to-face. Metallic purple house paint with racing stripes, a 10-foot chrome bald eagle in the yard, bright blue Astro turf lawn. It was a masterpiece. The next morning their email came. One word in the subject line, meeting. They demanded to see me at my house tomorrow night. The trap was ready, but I couldn't pull it off alone. That's where Louis came in. When I explained the plan to him, how he'd distract Karen while my old army buddy slipped into their house, he nearly swallowed his false teeth. "Mark, I'm 72. The most dangerous thing I did last week was bargain over bran flakes." "You're not breaking in, Louis," I said, patient. "You're distracting her. You're going to argue about your gnomes. Tell her you've had a change of heart and need help calculating your gnome-to-grass ratio. Be so pathetic and annoying she has to deal with you." Louis blinked. "Gnome-to-grass ratio, that's not a thing." "They don't know that." He stared at me for a long second, then a slow grin tugged at his lips. "You're serious." "As serious as Richard's watch," I said. Louis leaned back, shaking his head. "Well, hell, guess it's about time these gnomes earned their keep." The night before the meeting, I stood in my garage staring at the truck. Scratch still carved across the paint. Tire replaced. The war had changed. It wasn't about a fine anymore, not about a lien, not even about property. It was about standing up. For Jake, for Louis, for everyone they'd bled dry. Tomorrow, Karen and Richard were walking straight into my trap. And they had no idea the bear they'd poked had already sharpened his claws. The air in my house felt different that night. Electric, like a storm was brewing just above the shingles. The kind of silence you only feel before something big breaks loose. I had rehearsed everything. My old army buddy, Sal, the kind of man who could walk into a locked armory and leave without being seen, was parked a block away in a nondescript van. Louis was at home, pale as a ghost, but rehearsing his lines about gnomes and grass ratios. Me, I was the bait. My house was the stage. At exactly 7:00, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Karen and Richard standing there like royalty come to inspect a peasant's hut. Karen's bobbed haircut was sharper than ever, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. Richard's gold watch glinted under the porch light, his eyes flicking past me, landing on the F-100 in the garage. He sneered like he already owned it. "Let's get this over with," Karen snapped, barging past me without waiting for permission. "Always a pleasure," I muttered under my breath. They sat stiffly in my living room. Karen didn't waste a second. "Explain this nonsense proposal," she demanded, flipping her clipboard open like she was about to grade a failing student. I pulled out sketches, swatches, even a mock-up. "I was thinking the metallic purple would really make the chrome eagle pop," I said, keeping my tone innocent. Karen's face twisted like she'd bitten into a lemon. "This is a flagrant violation of every aesthetic standard this community holds dear." "But the bylaws just say I need a consultation," I said, all wide-eyed naivety. "It doesn't say you have to approve it, just that we need to talk." Richard shifted uncomfortably. Karen bristled. This wasn't the quick intimidation session they'd planned. This was a slow bleed. I debated with them for 20 minutes, purple versus lavender, the ideal wingspan for a yard eagle, whether AstroTurf came in HOA-approved shades of green. Then my phone buzzed, one short vibration, the signal, Louis was in position. I glanced through the window. There he was, shuffling across the street, tape measure dangling from his hand. He rang their doorbell with the solemnity of a man preparing for battle. Karen sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "What does that old fool want now?" "Probably something about his gnomes," I said lightly, hiding the adrenaline burning through me. She marched toward the door, Richard trailing behind. I followed just far enough to see Louis launch into his performance. "Karen," he called, waving the tape measure. "I've been thinking about the gnome-to-grass ratio. I want to make sure I'm in compliance, but I can't figure the math. Do I measure the gnome from the hat or the base?" Karen stopped dead, her face cycling from confusion to disbelief to pure rage. "What are you talking about?" Louis shuffled closer, tape measure snapping open. "Well, see, if the gnome's hat counts as vertical space, then technically I'm exceeding ornamentation limits per square foot of turf. But if it's just the body, I might squeak by. I was hoping you could help me calculate it." Karen's jaw dropped. She turned to Richard, sputtering. "He's insane." Richard muttered something about calling animal control on gnomes, but Karen was too busy trying to wrestle logic back into the conversation. Louis leaned in, pointing at one of his gnomes with exaggerated seriousness. Behind them, the second buzz came through my phone. Long, solid, the signal from Sal he was in. My chest tightened. The plan was working. I excused myself back inside, packing the living room like a man waiting on a jury verdict. 15 minutes. That's all Sal needed. 15 minutes of distraction, and I'd have the files that could end this war. The seconds dragged like hours. I pictured Sal moving through their house, silent as smoke, picking the back door lock in under 10 seconds, slipping into Richard's office where I knew the real treasure waited. My phone buzzed again, 3 quick taps, the signal I'd prayed for. Sal was out, hard drive cloned, mission complete. I nearly collapsed with relief. A few minutes later, Karen stormed back across the street, Louis trailing behind her with a tape measure dangling from his hand, wearing the biggest grin I'd ever seen. He'd played his part perfectly, stalling her with nonsense until Sal vanished into the night with a digital arsenal. Richard lingered, glaring at me, then at the truck, his jaw tight. He didn't know it yet, but I had just stolen the soul of his empire. Later that night, Sal and I sat in my garage, the truck looming beside us like a silent witness. He slid a thumb drive across the workbench. "Everything's here, every dirty little secret." My hands trembled as I opened the files, and there it was. A folder labeled CHLLC. Inside, bank statements, purchase agreements, emails, proof that Richard had been siphoning money straight out of the HOA account into Chestnut Holdings. Proof that the same money was buying up the homes of every family Karen had bled into foreclosure. But that wasn't the twist. The real shock waited in a subfolder labeled zoning. Inside were emails between Richard and a man I recognized instantly. A man who'd shaken hands at every city fair, who preached integrity at every council meeting. Arthur Vance, city councilman. The emails were damning. Vance had been feeding Richard inside information, plans for a new highway off-ramp just half a mile from our neighborhood. Still secret, years from being announced. Once it went public, property values here would explode. Richard and Karen weren't just greedy bullies. They were vultures with an inside man. They weren't just buying houses cheap. They were building an empire powered by corruption. Vance got a cut of every deal. Richard got the houses. Karen kept the neighborhood in line with fear. It was bigger than I'd ever imagined. I leaned back, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't about trucks or gnomes anymore. This wasn't even about an HOA. This was organized crime. And now I had the proof in my hands. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the glow of Richard's files burned behind my lids. Numbers, addresses, emails with a city councilman's name at the bottom. It was all there. Proof that Karen and Richard weren't just bullies with clipboards. They were predators. Wolves dressed in pastel sweaters and gold watches, bleeding people dry while the system looked away. I sat in the garage, the F-100 looming in the half-light, and I felt like I was staring at Jake across the hood again. His voice echoed in my head the way it always did when choices got heavy. What's the mission, brother? What's the objective? The soldier in me knew the answer. You take the evidence, you blow the whistle, you burn the empire down. But the man in me, the tired, grieving man, hesitated. Because blowing the whistle didn't just mean risking Karen's wrath. It meant going up against Richard, the city council, and whatever lawyers they had on speed dial. And if I lost? They stripped me bare, the lien, the foreclosure, the truck, the house, everything. I could already hear the whispers of my neighbors. Mark picked the wrong fight. Mark didn't know when to stop. That's when Louis knocked. Midnight, pajama shirt hanging loose, a glass of milk shaking in his hand. His eyes were wide, scared. Mark, they served me papers. They're really trying to take my house. Said I owe M $2,500. Said if I don't pay in 30 days, they're filing for foreclosure. The milk glass clinked against his teeth as his hand shook. This wasn't just about fines anymore. This was about breaking him, about breaking all of us. I pulled him into the garage, set the glass down, and showed him the files. He leaned over the laptop, squinting at the numbers. His jaw dropped as the picture came into focus. They're crooks, he whispered. All of it. They've been stealing from us the whole time. He looked up at me and his eyes were wet. Mark, you gotta stop M. That's when the hesitation died. Because I realized something simple. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was Louis's. It was every family who'd repainted a door 3 times. Every kid who'd watched their swing set ripped down. Every widow who'd lost her home to a structural violation that was never real. Jake always said dignity wasn't about pride. It was about standing when no one else could. And in that moment I knew what he'd tell me. Do the right thing, even if it costs you. The next morning I called Ben. My voice was steady now, no tremor of fear. I've got proof, Ben. Richard's funneling HOA money into Chestnut Holdings, and I've got emails with a councilman backing him up. There was silence on the line, long enough to make me wonder if he'd hung up. Then his voice came, sharper than before. Mark, do you know what you're holding? I know enough, I said. No, he snapped. You're holding a bomb. If you're right, this is fraud, racketeering, maybe even RICO territory. This isn't just small-town corruption. This could topple careers. People are going to fight back dirty. I can handle dirty, I said. Ben exhaled slowly. All right, but you need to play this smart. Evidence like this. You don't wave it around. You set the stage. You make sure when you drop it, there's nowhere for them to run. That night I called a meeting. Not official, just neighbors. People who'd whispered their grievances behind closed doors for too long. Louis spread the word like wildfire, and by 9 o'clock my garage was full. They came nervous, quiet, looking over their shoulders like Karen might burst in any second. But when I showed them the files, when I laid bare the truth, something shifted. A mom who'd been fined for letting her kids chalk the sidewalk let out a sob. A retired couple whose rose bushes had been torn out clenched each other's hands. And Louis, bless him, puffed up like a man 20 years younger, muttering, I knew those gnomes were innocent. Fear began to crack, and through the cracks, anger seeped in. We weren't just victims anymore, we were witnesses. And together, we were a jury waiting for judgment. I told them the plan. We weren't going to hide. We weren't going to beg. We were going to set a trap big enough to catch Karen, Richard, and even their councilman friend. And we were going to do it in the one place they thought they held all the power, the HOA meeting. Every head in that garage nodded, some with fear, some with fire, but all with resolve. When the neighbors finally left, the night felt quieter, heavier, like the whole street was holding its breath. I sat back in the garage alone, staring at the truck, scratched fender. My reflection warped in the scar, and I thought of Jake again. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stay silent the longest, but sometimes they're the ones who finally speak. Tomorrow night, the silence would end. Karen thought her master key could open anything. Richard thought his gold watch could buy anyone. Vance thought his council seat made him untouchable. But tomorrow, in front of the whole neighborhood, I was going to show them a different kind of key. The key to truth. And once it turned there, be no locking it back up. The night of the HOA meeting, the air was heavy with tension. Folding chairs filled the community center, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. The usual hush of fear was gone. Tonight, there was a different energy. Anger, anticipation. Karen strutted in first, clipboard in hand, her smile wide and venomous. Richard followed, gold watch gleaming under the fluorescence, his briefcase snapping shut with a smug click. They thought it was business as usual, a night of rubber-stamped fines and frightened neighbors. But not this night. I sat in the front row, the F-100's keys in my pocket, Louis at my side. He'd brought one of his gnomes tucked under his arm like a mascot. "For luck," he whispered. Karen rapped the table with her pen. "Let's come to order. First on the agenda, the delinquent accounts of Mr. Mark Jensen and Mr. Louis Barnes." "Hold it," my voice cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Karen blinked, stunned by the interruption. "Excuse me." I stood, slow and steady, letting the silence work in my favor. Then I dropped the folder onto the table with a slap that echoed off the walls. "Before you talk about fines, maybe you should explain these." Richard frowned, flipping the folder open. His face drained of color as the first page stared back at him. Bank statements, emails, property records. A murmur rippled through the room. "What is this?" Karen snapped, her voice rising. I leaned forward, my voice steady, calm. "It's proof that the two of you have been bleeding this neighborhood dry. Fines turned into foreclosures, foreclosures sold to Chestnut Holdings, and guess who collects the mail for Chestnut Holdings?" Gasps erupted, eyes turned on Richard. His jaw tightened, but his silence condemned him more than words ever could. I didn't stop. I pulled out the next stack. Emails with Councilman Vance, zoning plans, inside information about the highway expansion. You weren't just stealing houses, you were building an empire on the backs of every family in this room. Karen's face twisted. Lies, baseless accusations. "Then why?" I said, holding up a photo snapped by Sal. "Did Richard pick up mail from Chestnut's P.O. box last Saturday morning?" The photo, Richard's gold watch glinting as he pulled envelopes from the box, flashed across the projector screen I'd set up behind me. Sal had thought of everything. The room erupted. Shouts, anger, years of whispered frustrations boiling over at once. Karen slammed her fist down. "Order, order." But no one was listening anymore. Councilman Vance, who had slipped in quietly at the back, tried to leave, but Ben was waiting. My lawyer friend stood, blocking the door. "Leaving so soon, Councilman?" he said loud enough for every ear to hear. "You might want to stay. The police are already on their way." Karen's eyes went wide. Police. Blue lights flickered through the blinds. The doors swung open and two officers strode in, uniforms crisp, voices firm. "Richard Holcomb, Karen Holcomb, you're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy." Chaos broke loose. Karen shrieked, lunging for the clipboard like it was a shield. Richard stood frozen, his watch glinting as the cuffs clicked over his wrists. Vance tried to argue, but Ben handed over the emails, neat as a deck of cards. The officers didn't even hesitate. They cuffed him too. Neighbors who had lived in fear for years watched as their tormentors were led out the door in disgrace. Louis squeezed my shoulder, his old hands trembling. "You did it, Mark. You actually did it." But I shook my head. "No, Louis, we did it." The room filled with applause. Not for me alone, but for everyone who had finally found their voice. Later that night, I walked back into my garage. The F-100 sat there in silence, scarred but unbroken, just like us. I ran my hand over the scratched fender. It would never be perfect again. But maybe it didn't need to be. Maybe the scar was the reminder we all needed that dignity isn't about being untouched. It's about surviving the hits and standing taller because of them. Louis stopped by, gnome still tucked under his arm. He set it on my workbench like it belonged there. "Figured he earned a place of honor," he said. I laughed, the kind of laugh I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since Jake died, the garage didn't feel so empty. The neighborhood changed after that. Not overnight, not magically, but slowly, steadily. The fines vanished. The fear faded. People painted their doors whatever color they wanted. Kids drew chalk on the sidewalks without looking over their shoulders. And Louis' gnomes, they multiplied, a whole army standing proud, unchallenged. As for me, I kept the truck. I kept the scar. And every time I looked at it, I thought of Jake, of the fight, of the moment when silence broke and the truth finally won. Sometimes justice doesn't roar in with sirens. Sometimes it comes from one neighbor refusing to bow, one old man with gnomes, one scarred truck in a garage. And sometimes karma comes wearing handcuffs. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.